Thank you for clicking. This is Kayla from 9CI and Bruce, also from 9CI. So for those of our viewers that perhaps haven't been watching, or you are are caught up on our videos, Bruce is an electrohypersensitive-ish. You're sensitive.
Ish, yeah.
Yeah, you're sensitive.
I am. I used to be in worse shape. Mm-hmm. And that was, well, we'll get into that, but that's as a result of just long-term constant exposure to microwave radiation. So yeah, I would say that I'm very aware and somewhat sensitive, but fortunately things have improved.
Hypersensitive.
Yeah, and we'll talk about it.
Yeah, so we wanted to discuss EHS, or electrohypersensitivity, today. So, tell us your story. How did it begin?
Well, I'll be asking questions of you later on too, because we want to compare. What we want to do also in this video, I think, is compare what it's like to live in this current day and age with technology and wireless radiation as someone that's aware and sensitive to things that can experience physical reactions, as opposed to a normal person, right?
Normal.
Yes. Now, there's already the start, because somebody that's labeled electrosensitive, especially in North America, immediately you get into the discussion of the whole tinfoil hat thing, and things like that, and that's a difficult thing to deal with. We did make a video. I think it's Tinfoil Hats Debunked.
Yes.
If you haven't already watched that, maybe that's a good one to check out. It might even be helpful to check that out before this video, but we don't want to stop you from watching this one right now.
Yeah.
So it's okay if you watch it after. So, how did it start? Yeah, it's a very very silent thing. You're not aware of it. I mean, I've said this to you before, and even as 9CI was being formed, I mean, back in the day, you know, David was an electrical engineer, and his schooling was that, you know, the current safety standards, the thermally based safety standards for microwave radiation are fine, and this is what you're taught in school.
Yeah.
Then David met me, and I was like, huh, are you sure about that? Are you sure about that, right? And so he started digging more, and as a result, look what 9CI is doing. I mean, you know, a lot of what the company is doing is centered around microwave radiation measurement and detection devices for, you know.
And I know it's part of the company, you know, creed or motto or efforts to be safe with our technology. The stuff that we make. Absolutely,
yeah. The stuff that we do, we've given the option. If there is a wireless device in the tech that 9CI makes, there is the option to turn it off.
And they're usually low powered, so it's not like lowest power that you can get while still being functional. So
that, I think, actually that's an interesting thing. Maybe we'll have another video in the future about it. Sort of like what is the norm for companies going forward to maintain a precautionary approach to wireless radiation, and yet still work with it.
It's still doable, though. Like we're doing it. It's very doable.
This is what we're talking about in the Tinfoil Hats Debunked video. We talked about that. Like, look, right now, both of us are wearing wireless lav mics, and they're operating, you know, 500-600 megahertz. Well, you know, I know that I'm not going to wear the transmitter right on my body, because in this case, we're not walking around.
Yeah.
The transmitter is sitting here on the ground, and the distance away from me, that lowers the exposure.
Yeah.
There's no reason to have the transmitter. So it's little things like that. So I still haven't answered your question, have I?
Yeah.
How did it start? Yeah.
Hindsight.
Yeah,
remember that easier diagnosis.
Yeah, hindsight is 20/20. So, not getting on to all the details, I think I talked about it in the previous Tinfoil Hats video, was that I think I had a fairly unusual childhood for microwave radiation exposure. Just my interests in electronics. There's two things that I loved as a kid. It was music and electronics, and I did both a lot. And the electronics eventually led to ham radio. It's not so well known now. Anyway, I got involved in that. I was one of Canada's youngest licensed ham radio operators, and so again, just like engineers learn in school, when you're learning about radio transmitters and things like that, you're learning that the current safety standards are in place and they're fine. So I had this exposure growing up, and then you know, I lived in New York City for 7 years, but that was before the time of, around the time when cell phones were just becoming popular. So when I left New York, that was around the time when things started to ramp up. Then I wound up in Western Canada, but I didn't live in the city, so I was in a fairly quiet location. The recording studio was basically in the middle of nowhere. What started for me is, so I had that exposure as a kid, a lot of exposures, and I think that did a lot of damage. But what happened when I moved into the city, into Calgary, I happened to pick an apartment that was right, there were two 16, 15-story buildings right next to each other. And on one of the apartments, as a lot of apartments are nowadays, they have cell phone towers on the roof. And I remember thinking when I moved in, it's just like, huh.
Those are not just ugly, but
yeah,
probably
I
not
know
great.
that. Yeah, exactly. There's some microwave energy. I knew that there was transmitters there, but my going back to sort of like, you know, training theory and what you're taught is sort of like, well, you're not close enough for any thermal concerns. And because I was sort of underneath them, I was looking at the antennas, you know, maybe 80 or 100 feet away.
Yeah.
And I was sort of underneath, and I thought, well, I'm not in their direct beam path, so it's fine. Well, what happened during those next 5 years is I noticed a slow, in hindsight, at the time I didn't really notice it, but in hindsight, it was a slow and steady decline in health.
So what kind of symptoms can people be like?
Sleep.
Yeah.
Sleep. And the thing is, sleep deprivation and insomnia, or inability to sleep deeply or dream well, it's immediately dismissed in our world as being, oh, your stress levels are too high, what's going on with work or whatever. And yeah, but the thing is, I mean, there weren't too many radical changes and things like that. And so I just thought, well, it's just adapting to, you know, the city life changes or whatever.
Yeah, maybe it's too loud and I'm just not sleeping very
Right,
deeply.
exactly. So you deal with it. But then there's other things. It's just like you're not feeling well. And then, you know, it was in year 4, especially after being there, I started, some of my work involved radio control of these drones. And so I was working with RC transmitters that you normally hold right here. And what I started noticing was just like, I was feeling the effects of these transmitters. I'm going, what is going on? And it was around the same time when I started doing some digging about, it's just like, can there be health implications from this? And then all of a sudden there was this moment where I realized that, oh, you know, something is going on here. And so then it started. Yeah. So and then of course I think I mentioned, when you discover this and you make a connection between how you feel and your things that you're doing, the tech that you're using, all of a sudden you turn into this research geek. Suddenly in your life, that became my focus. And I'm curious, like if other people are watching this video that are experiencing this, or that might be on the start of it or are extremely sensitive to this. I'm curious, you know, what their experience was when they made the realization, because I think most people that have this happen all automatically start to go into research mode. At least I am. When I discover something that's wrong, or I want to fix or understand, I get this tunnel vision and I turn into this researcher, and any spare time that I had, I was watching and videos, YouTube videos, reading papers, and I slowly, well, not too slowly, I came to the conclusion that the current safety standards that are based on thermal.
Yes.
So basically, unless your tissue is heating up, you're good to go. I decided that since we now live in a day and age where we can actually look at DNA, and we can show that DNA single and double strand breaks are happening from RF exposure at levels much lower than the current safety standards, I tend to be more open to the latest science, because the current safety standards are based on science that's decades old.
80s.
Right. So then it gets into there's so many things to talk about this, because then it gets into the psychology of all this.
Yeah. And how like deeply linked the mind is to the body, and body to the mind.
Well,
because you're having psychological effects.
Right.
From these symptoms doesn't negate the fact that you're still having effects.
Right. So what happens here I think in North America, and other people can comment, I think I know there's much more awareness of this in many countries in Europe, especially the Nordic countries. But here, the psychological stuff starts kicking in, because the first thought that people have, and friends of mine have, are just sort of like, oh yeah, well, Bruce is just, it's just... You
can be weird and still have actual symptoms.
Right.
They don't need to be related.
Exactly. So not only is Bruce a weird person, but now he's talking about, consequences of long-term exposure to RF, and it's like, well... most people think, and this is where the tinfoil hats thing, and I actually find comments like that hurtful. By the way, this is probably coming off initially as a very sobering video. Apologies for that. It is a very sobering video.
Yeah.
Don't want it to be depressing. There is light at the end of the tunnel, so just stick with us on this. Stay tuned. But, when we talked about making this video, you were thinking, it's just like, let's get into the details of what it's like, right? To have this happen to you. And for people that, part of the reason for doing this video as well is that I think there's going to be a growing number of people that experience this. The fact is that the background level of microwave radiation, is ever growing, exactly.
Exponentially so in some cases.
Yeah, especially in the city. So I think there are going to be more people, just because there's more tech, there's more wireless stuff happening. People are spending more time in these environments. And so to be aware of it right now might be helpful. And so if I had to, if there was a reason to go through all this, what I would call a nightmare experience of having to deal with this and realize this, is that maybe this conversation right now can help educate other people.
And streamline their research process so they don't have to suffer as long.
Right. So, let us know where you're at with this and things like that. And getting to the point, I'll just touch on this point about tinfoil hat that gets lumped into being conspiracy theory sort of things, is that all of a sudden now me being aware of this and starting to talk about it, what I notice, especially on the internet, and if you look at the typical YouTube comments, is that anytime any new concept or a reevaluation is suggested about a certain thing in this world, whatever it might be. There are people that are pushing for it, and then there's a group that just flat out deny and say it's ridiculous, label tinfoil hat in this case, or conspiracy theory, or the current safety standards. They make the arguments, and I'm just wondering if that's maybe a bit lazy and perhaps closed-minded, given the fact that in the past, I don't know if humans if we've had a very good track record of adapting to the consequences of new things. We were talking just in the office this morning about lead poisoning. What was it? The people that you were saying that came across in the...
Yeah, across the Atlantic with the cans of food because it's preserved more readily. Yeah. And the lining of the cans would seep in to the food, and everyone developed lead poisoning. Well, not everyone. Many people. That were like sailors and stuff.
Right. That's a real concern. So there's lead, asbestos, DDT.
Coal.
Sorry?
Coal.
Yeah. X-rays. Yeah. We talked about this in the
other forms of radiation. Yeah.
Other forms of ionizing flames. Yeah. Ionizing. There was a time in history, believe it or not, there was a time in history where we were ignorant of ionizing radiation, X-rays, gamma rays, nuclear radiation, that we thought there was no problem. The reason I'm bringing up all that is that could it not be slightly possible that we have to reevaluate microwave radiation, long-term exposure to not only analog continuous wave CW sources of radiation, which used to be the norm, but pulse digital sources that are on all the time from multiple frequencies, multiple modulation techniques. Could it not be that those standards need to be modified?
And that maybe they are safe, but in small doses, but no one's actually getting small doses anymore because of our current environments.
Exactly. So the point being is that there I was starting to come to these realizations, and then you look at sources, and then you look at the comments and you see videos on it. Yeah,
it's helpful to know where they're coming from when you actually are suffering.
Right. We'll get into that shortly. The kind of equipment. Anyway, if you are watching this and thinking that, I'm a tinfoil hat person.
I mean, the hats look so good.
Yes, I think I joked. It's my metallic hair. I encourage you to at least have an open mind, and I think we've said this before. I know I have said in other interviews, and it's like, even if I'm wrong or mostly wrong about this, or the people that are pushing to have the safety standards changed, why not, in the meantime, at least take a precautionary approach to this?
It doesn't hurt.
It doesn't hurt. So again, it's just like, well, instead of having this thing right here, why not just put it away? If you're using a cell phone, based on this conflicting evidence that you're hearing out there and all this confusion, use your cell phone on speakerphone mode. All these things. So this is what I'm talking about. So sorry. The psychology of this, when you make these realizations, suddenly the world, all these things which used to be invisible, microwave radiation, you can't see it, you can't touch it. The only way you can taste it is if you're a cell phone antenna installer that works for one of the companies that's working on a live antenna mast. They often talk about being able to taste copper in your mouth, and let me tell you, if you're getting exposures like that, you're
immediate symptoms from a healthy individual. That cannot be good for you.
Yeah, you're in thermal levels, and that it's just simply not safe.
Right. So those individuals would be at a greater risk. Exactly. Not only are they getting super high exposures, but they're also, just like the rest of us, not getting any rest time from it.
Right. So David made a video of the airport radar at Seattle SeaTac Airport, right? And it's just like,
And
well,
all airports will be like that too. It's not just the giant ones.
yeah, unfortunately, right? So depending on the work that you do. So in my case, you know, being involved in electronics and ham radio, and then living. So there's the work that you do. The occupational exposure, and then in a growing number of cases, people are living sometimes unexpectedly near a cell phone tower.
Even if you're not near it, sometimes the reflections from the other apartment buildings.
Right. So what was happening for me? Not only did I live in one apartment building that had cell phone towers on the roof, but I actually moved and lived in another one. Again, this was around the same time when I wasn't really sure, but what was happening, the antennas were on the roof, but there were other buildings in the area, and so the radiation would be reflecting. We can show in this video, I'm going to give Kayla some clips. I've got some video clips of the apartment. You know, I'm walking around with a gigahertz solutions meter. It was the the HF 59B. Might have been the 35C with the omnidirectional antenna, but anyway, it was like, I think 4,000, 5,000 microwatts per square meter, pretty much anywhere in the apartment, even higher. I'll have to look at that video again. And that meter wasn't even capable of measuring the 5.6 gig Wi-Fi band. So fortunately we've got meters now, the one we make, covers all those bands. So I think my exposure was
probably quite a bit higher.
Right? So, okay, so you get the occupational exposure, and then if you're living in an area, especially people in multi-unit apartments or rental apartments, I mean, everybody is streaming Wi-Fi. Everyone's got their own Wi-Fi router.
Multiple devices connected to it.
Multiple devices. Some people have multiple Wi-Fi networks, right? If you see the wireless routers that are in the stores right now with, multiple antennas, 5, 6, or 7 antennas on them, the idea is as much power as possible to get as strong a signal as possible. And it's like, wow, okay, but where is that Wi-Fi router in relation to where you're sleeping, for example?
Also the necessity of having those power levels.
Exactly. So, right, that brings a good point. We've talked about this before. There is a way to move forward with all this technology and use it, but it can be at much lower power levels. Do cell phone companies need to have those power levels that are on apartment buildings right now? No, they don't. Our technology receivers are more sensitive, they're more frequency selective, so transmitter powers can be lowered. There are more cell phone sites in urban areas. So the good news is that cell phones don't have to be transmitting at full power all the time. So there's ways around it.
Yeah.
And having a device to measure all of a sudden now becomes extremely important. So in your life now, if you're an electrosensitive person or somebody that's gaining awareness,
it's a good first step.
Pretty much you have something you're going to use to measure. So a question for you is, let's say you're going to meet a friend at a coffee shop.
As a non-EHS or non-sensitive person?
As a normal person. Well, actually with Kayla, I don't know if I'll use the term normal, but as a
It's a strong word.
So what goes through your mind? I'm just curious.
So like my big concerns would be like getting there on time for one. For another, like what do I want? Good. So like
what do you want to drink?
Americano, yeah, something like that. If I'm early, like how am I going to entertain myself? Like do they have their Wi-Fi password posted so I can log in and use their Wi-Fi rather than my data, kind of thing. Like small things like that would be my thought process on it. Very simple concerns.
Right.
Dramatic. I don't know their Wi-Fi password. I don't know if I can do this.
Yeah. So, okay. So you take that in contrast to somebody like me going into a coffee shop. First, aside from that I don't drink coffee, but tea. I love the smell of coffee, but people don't need to know that. So aside from asking myself, why am I in a coffee shop? But let's say I'm meeting somebody there, First thing I'm going to do is take out a discrete, a safe and sound classic.
The classic, yeah.
The classic, or something better and smaller that we might be talking about or developing in the future.
Maybe, yeah.
We might have to cut that video out. I don't know. But the Safe and Sound Classic, it's small, discreet. It's a quick way. I can turn it on, and there's 4 LEDs that quickly tell me. It's just like, oh, I can't be sitting here because there's a wireless router. Mm-hmm. Or it's not like I can't be sitting there. I would prefer not to sit there.
But someone else might not be able to.
Someone else might not be able to. Years ago, I wouldn't have been able to. Now, keep in mind, we're jumping around quite a bit here. The hypersensitivity can be very, very slight to extreme. There are people
it's a gradient.
that
it's
you
not
and
so much.
Exactly. It's not. This isn't black and white. This isn't like an on and off switch. Anything biological, anything related to your health is a whole spectrum of colors.
And each human being is different, so
it's a holistic thing. Anyway, there are people that we know that are so sensitive they can't even be near somebody when their cell phone is on and transmitting. They can actually tell when a transmitter on. There have been some tests done in labs. They gather a bunch of electrohypersensitive individuals, and they put them in the room, and they have them with a push button basically tell us when the transmitter is on. And some of the early tests, from what I understand, were done at such high power levels that the experiment actually made the electrosensitive people sick afterwards. There is a CEO of a well-known company in England that has become electrohypersensitive, and he was part of those tests, and he was describing this. So the point being that depending on the exposure that people have had, they can tolerate this kind of thing to more or lesser degrees. So me now, even now, recovering and getting better from electrohypersensitivity, it's just like I will choose, if there's an option, to not sit near a Wi-Fi router.
It's true.
Right.
Like if you're not going to get sick.
Right. So then I go there, and then it's just like, okay. And then the reality also is, if you're sitting around somebody with their iPads out, the amount of radiation coming off of the front side of an iPad where the Wi-Fi antennas are, is unsettling to me, and so I'll choose not to sit near somebody, and so it turns into this weird social thing. It's just like
you can't even sit in the corner because there's going to be a lot lot of reflections in there too. So it's like, I'll just sit outside.
Yeah, so it's this weird thing. It's like, what's that movie, The Matrix or something? And it's sort of, it's frustrating because you want to just blend and do the normal.
But your eyes have been open to a new type of world.
Right. So I think I've used this saying a few times with you, is like resistance is
futile.
Resistance is futile. Sorry, I'm not the Borg. Ignorance was bliss.
That was it.
Resistance is futile. Where did that come up?
Much better.
Yeah. So obviously it's good to have the knowledge, and I hate to think of what things would be like for me if I continued to live in that high radiation environment.
And just suffer.
And I think deal with potentially serious health issues.
Oh, yeah, especially once you've become aware of them, then compounding symptoms. So would you like to go over what you did once you found out? So once you measured, what did you do afterwards?
Okay. So it was like the holy crap moment where you just realize, oh,
this sucks.
This sucks. So at the time I was in a rental apartment, so it's like, well, okay. I wasn't aware of RF shielding paints, or I was kind of aware, but the cost to paint was crazy, and it was just like, well, if it's just a rental apartment, I'm not going to be here long term. So I'll dig up some pictures and videos. So in my digging, I was like, okay, Faraday cage. What are
biggest
things
I can get?
What's the easiest way to do this? I mean, I even tried, the notion of building a frame out of 2x3s and wire screening and things like that, and that was fairly complicated. So anyway, I discovered that Mylar tents, Mylar grow tents, are actually the film of Mylar, the silver reflective film, is actually somewhat conductive. And so if you get a tent, it's reflective on all sides, I guess, for the idea is that, that there's even lighting in this tent. So I went on Amazon and I ordered an 8-foot by 8-foot Mylar tent. And I think it was about 6 feet high. And so I put this tent in my bedroom, and it took up most of the space in the bedroom. And at this point, again, imagine yourself in a sort of sleep-deprived state for many months, or in some cases many years. You're kind of desperate as to figure out a way, and you read that, okay, Mylar tents are going to lower the exposure about 10 dB, or for most people, it's just like, okay, this will lower your exposure 10 times of what, reduction in exposure. And so I set up my bed inside this Mylar tent. So when I would go to sleep at nighttime, I would unzip, go inside, zip up the Mylar tent. I had some low-speed fans up in the corner. They have vents on the top to attach to, HVAC systems for air circulation and stuff like that. I could tell you it wasn't comfortable. It was warmer than not sleeping in a tent inside your apartment in a city. So all this, while this is going on, I was thinking, yeah, I'm nuts. Like, this is gone. But what am I going to do? It was providing relief. I was sleeping better. The tested levels were lower. Now, some might argue it's just like, well, that could have been a psychological.
Well, it's measurable.
It's measurable. Right, and so.
And even if it was psychological, you were sleeping better. Does it matter, really?
Good question.
Like, it didn't. Aside from the fact that you were sleeping a little bit warmer and you had to buy a grow tent, is that such a big deal?
So there's the insecurity. So I think people that are suffering from this can have some insecurities as a result of this, because it's like. You have to do these things which are not entirely mainstream.
Traditional.
So am I proud of the fact that describing this? I don't think I've shared. My closest friends kind of knew what was going on, and they were very supportive. Nowadays, after their awareness of what's going on, they totally get it, and they see it as a real thing. But I can certainly. I know at the time. Yeah, kind of that look.
Just like
the look Kayla is giving me right now is a look that I got. No,
it's like we love you.
Yes, we love you.
We're concerned.
Right. Right. So that kind of thing. So yes, what you can do though, I mean, a Mylar tent. It's fine. It's helpful. But my experience is that the levels in urban areas are very high. So I would suggest that it's worth your time to get some shielding paint. And so inside of an apartment, wherever you are, focus on the sleeping area. So the area, it's not that expensive to completely shield one room. I mean, if you've got a one-bedroom apartment, take your bedroom area, paint the walls with the RF shielding paint.
You suggested Y-Shield? Is that
Y-Shield, I think, is one of the only companies right now that makes some quality, consistent quality RF shield.
Yeah, you don't want inconsistent quality.
No.
If you, again, go back to our tinfoil hats debunked.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're going to shield something,
you have to do it properly.
Do it properly, right? So anyway, the paint is a dark gray charcoal color. So if you're not into that, which most people aren't, well, maybe some people are, but it feels, when you paint a room like that, it feels like you're in a backstage of a performance venue before you go on stage. Everything's black so that you know that the people in the audience don't see anything back there. So unless you like that, some people do, you can paint over the Y-Shield paint, and then you've got a sleeping area that's quiet. So start with that, and then you're going to notice and get some tool to measure.
Make sure you did it properly.
Make sure you get. Now, obviously, you know, we're part of the company that makes these things, but this is the only prosumer meter that I'm aware of, certainly in this price range, that is actually lab calibrated, tested.
We are proud of it.
Yeah, we've gone through great extents to make sure that the claims are real and that So anyway, get something to let you know what's going on, and there is good news. So start with the sleeping area, and then the rest will fall into place.
Yeah.
If you can't do that, consider moving. I think going forward in the future, more and more people are going to have to create these little Faraday cages, especially for their sleeping areas, and
just get the rest, which is why a lot of people are developing symptoms, because they aren't able to recover.
Right. So again, getting back, have the test equipment, know what you can do about shielding a sleeping area, why that's so important, and then you will. The big breakthrough is that eventually you will feel like you've got some control. This is the reason. It's sad to think, but there are a number of people that are so sensitive to EMF that they've moved to these quiet zones. What is it? The
dead zone.
Dead zone. I don't like that term.
I know, it's dark. It's
a
radio frequency dead zone. That's why they called it that, I think.
Yeah, there's an area around an observatory, a radio observatory area in the States that's a radio dead zone, because they're listening for things out in space. The signals are so faint that they can't have any interference within. I don't know the size of it. I was going to do.
It's decently sized.
It's a fair, yeah. So there's a lot of people living there, and I feel badly for these people that they've had to do that. But what I do see is that once an electrosensitive person, or once somebody that's aware of this is educated and has the tools and starts making corrections, you regain a sense of control in your life, and you do not feel trapped anymore. And the feeling of being trapped and not knowing what to do, those experiences living like that in Calgary were some of the darkest, most stressful times in my life. But now it's sort of like, okay, I understand what's going on. It's very frustrating to see the mass proliferation of microwave radiation, but with understanding, with knowledge, the sense of control is
still there.
Is fantastic. And then whatever happens, when a cell phone tower gets put up in the area, rather than feeling threatened and feeling like, what are you going to do? Well, you know that there are tools. There are shielding fabrics. There's window shielding, film that you can put on windows that doesn't block any. You can look through it, but it blocks RF. Shielding paint, all these things. And look at, from an engineering point of view, I've said this to engineers before, from a Wi-Fi security point of view, isn't it kind of ideal if your house is shielded? Your Wi-Fi network is not going to be seen by anybody outside of your house. I think that's a good thing.
There's minor benefits that you
right. So I think it's coming. It's just, if you're dealing with this, hang in there. Keep learning as much as you can. Obviously, you've got some test equipment, but you're certainly not alone.
No,
you're certainly not alone. And there are a growing number of people that are talking about this, and I think the standards will eventually change. You just have to be patient with.
Legislation always takes forever.
Yes, you just have to be patient with we're notoriously slow at learning. What can I say?
Well, thank you so much, Bruce, for sharing with us.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's difficult to talk about and reflect on it, but I hope this helps. I hope this helps somebody that's going through this.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Okay, Kayla.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for sticking with us for that. We'll be posting this on SoundCloud as well, so you can follow us on there for an audio only option. And yeah, please feel free to leave some comments below and let us know about your cases perhaps, or even if you just want to, leave your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Awesome. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.